What if the entire town in From was never designed to trap people? What if it was designed to repeat them? Because there is one theory that suddenly makes the monsters, the children, the symbols, the cycles, the memories, and even the strange connection between certain characters look like pieces of the same machine. The town may not simply be a prison. It may be a story that is being forced to happen again and again. And if that is true, then the people trapped inside From were never chosen randomly. They were brought there because they are capable of filling roles that have already existed before. That changes almost everything, because we've spent years asking the wrong question. We've asked, who built the town? We've asked, what are the monsters? We've asked, why can't anyone escape? But here's what changes everything. What if the town doesn't care who you are? What if it only cares what role you play? Look at what the show is actually telling us. People arrive from completely different places, different lives, different personalities, different histories. And yet, once they enter the town, strange patterns begin appearing. Certain people seem connected to events that happened long before they arrived. Certain symbols keep returning. Certain nightmares feel older than the person experiencing them. And some characters appear to recognize things they logically should never have seen before. That shouldn't happen in a normal supernatural prison. But it makes perfect sense if From is built around repetition. A cycle where the same emotional events keep finding new people. And this is where the theory gets darker. What if the town isn't repeating the exact same story? What if it is repeating the same roles? The protector, the sacrifice, the child, the witness, the person who tries to understand the rules, the person who tries to escape, and eventually the person who discovers the truth. That could explain why the town seems obsessed with children, why certain characters experience visions, why the past refuses to stay buried, and why knowledge itself appears to behave differently inside this place. Because in From, information doesn't simply disappear. It returns. A symbol appears. Someone sees it. Someone remembers it. Someone else encounters it years later. And suddenly, an event from the past becomes relevant to the present. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is why the story needs to repeat itself at all. Think about the way the town operates. The road appears. The tree blocks the path. People turn around. They eventually arrive in the same impossible place. Then the rules begin. Don't go outside at night. Don't trust the creatures. Find shelter. Use the talismans. Follow the signs. And eventually someone tries to understand the system. But every time the residents believe they're getting closer to an answer, the town produces another mystery, another symbol, another vision, another impossible connection. It almost feels intentional, as if the town doesn't simply punish curiosity. It uses curiosity to move the story forward. And this is where one of the strangest details becomes important. The people trapped here don't just suffer physically. They are constantly forced to confront versions of their deepest fears. Loss, guilt, abandonment, failure, death. The fear of hurting someone you love. The fear that you are responsible for something you cannot control. That means the monsters may not be the true engine of the town. They may simply be one part of it. A mechanism designed to keep people afraid enough to continue playing their roles. Because fear makes people predictable. And predictable people repeat patterns. Look at Boyd. He becomes the protector. He tries to hold everyone together. He creates rules. He sacrifices himself. He carries responsibility for everyone else's survival. But eventually, his greatest strength becomes his weakness. Because the more he tries to protect everyone, the more the town gives him something to protect. It keeps creating situations where he must choose between two impossible outcomes. Save one person, risk another, follow the rules, break them, trust what he sees, or trust what he knows. And that may not be coincidence. It may be the role the town assigned him. But Boyd isn't the only one. Victor is even more disturbing, because Victor has lived inside this nightmare for decades. And despite everything he has forgotten, something inside him continues preserving fragments, drawings, objects, memories, places, images that seem meaningless until much later. This is the detail everyone missed. Victor's memories don't behave like ordinary memories. They behave like pieces of a story that someone is trying not to forget. And if the town is a repeating cycle, Victor becomes incredibly important because he isn't simply a survivor. He may be a living archive, someone who has witnessed multiple versions of the same nightmare, someone whose mind has been damaged by the repetition. And perhaps that's why remembering is so dangerous, because remembering doesn't just reveal the past. It may reveal the pattern. Now think about the boy in white. For a long time, it was easy to see him as a mysterious guide, someone who appears when the characters need help. But what if that interpretation is too simple? What if the boy in white isn't guiding people toward freedom? What if he is guiding them toward the next stage of the story? That distinction is terrifying, because helping someone survive doesn't necessarily mean helping them escape. A person can be protected while still being trapped. And this may explain one of the biggest contradictions in From. The town sometimes gives people exactly what they need to move forward. A clue, a vision, a strange encounter, a mysterious object, a person appearing at the right moment. But just when the characters seem close to understanding everything, the system changes.
Why?
Because perhaps the town cannot allow the story to end. It needs another question, another mystery, another person to investigate, another person to doubt, another person to sacrifice. And if that is true, then the entire supernatural environment has one objective: keep the cycle alive. That means the monsters don't need to kill everyone. In fact, killing everyone would be a failure. The town needs survivors. It needs witnesses. It needs people who remember just enough to keep searching. It needs hope, because without hope, nobody would continue. And without people continuing, there would be no story to repeat. But here's where this theory becomes much more dangerous. If the town is repeating roles instead of simply repeating events, then some characters may already be connected to people who occupied those roles before them. Not because they are reincarnations in the simple sense, but because the town may be recreating relationships, the same emotional conflict, the same sacrifice, the same mistake, the same attempt to save someone, over and over again. And that would explain why certain encounters feel strangely familiar, why some characters seem drawn toward mysteries they don't understand, why certain children are connected to forces that existed long before the current residents arrived. The town isn't necessarily asking, "Who are you?" It may be asking, "Which part of the story are you going to become?" And once you see From through that lens, every major mystery starts looking different. The monsters become enforcers. The symbols become markers. The visions become fragments. The children become keys. The memories become evidence. And the residents become actors trapped inside a story they never agreed to perform. But there's still one problem. If the cycle is real, who is writing the story? Because someone or something has to decide which roles return. And that question takes us somewhere much darker. Because maybe the town isn't the prison. Maybe the town is only the stage. And whatever is controlling the cycle is still somewhere beyond the stage. That is where the next piece of the theory becomes terrifying. If the town is a repeating story, then the strangest events in From stop looking random. They start looking like instructions. And this is where the theory gets much darker. Because the town doesn't simply create danger. It seems to create patterns that force people into specific decisions. Think about what happens whenever someone gets close to understanding the rules. The environment changes. A new threat appears. A familiar symbol returns. Someone experiences a vision. A character discovers something that should have remained buried. It's almost as if the town is constantly correcting the direction of the story.
But why?
Because maybe the people inside aren't supposed to solve the mystery. They're supposed to recreate it. And one of the strongest pieces of evidence is the way the past keeps invading the present. From repeatedly shows us that history inside this place doesn't behave normally. Objects survive. Images survive. Stories survive. Memories survive. Even when the people connected to those things are gone. That suggests something important. The town may not preserve people. It preserves narrative information. And if that's true, then the objects scattered throughout the town may be more important than they appear. A bottle, a drawing, a symbol, a strange location. a familiar piece of clothing. Any one of these things can become a connection between different moments, almost like bookmarks in a book. And if the town is a story, then a bookmark isn't just an object. It's a way of telling the next person, this part matters. That's why the bottle tree is so interesting. At first, it looks like another supernatural mystery. But the deeper possibility is that it represents something much larger. A place where information from different moments is stored. A physical representation of the town's obsession with connecting past and present. Because the most frightening thing about From isn't that the characters are trapped in one location. It's that they may be trapped inside a sequence. A sequence that has already happened before. And may happen again. Now look at the monsters. We usually treat them as predators. They come out at night. They hunt. They smile. They manipulate people. But notice something strange. They don't behave like animals. They often talk. They understand human emotions. They know how to tempt people. They know how to exploit relationships. And most importantly, they don't always rush to kill. Sometimes they talk. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they deliberately create psychological pressure. Why? If their only purpose was killing, this behavior would be inefficient. But if their purpose is to maintain fear, it becomes perfectly logical. The monsters don't just destroy bodies. They destroy certainty. They make people question what is real. They make people question each other. They turn relationships into weaknesses. And once people stop trusting their own minds, the cycle becomes easier to control. This could explain why the town repeatedly produces experiences that feel personal. A nightmare, a hallucination, a voice, a dead person appearing, a vision that seems specifically designed for one individual. That's not random horror. That's targeted psychological pressure. The town knows that physical imprisonment isn't enough. It needs to make the characters participate in their own imprisonment. And that is exactly what happens. They investigate. They argue. They split apart. They make desperate decisions. They become obsessed. They sacrifice themselves. They chase answers. And every one of those decisions pushes the story forward. But here's the major reframe. Maybe the town doesn't control people by controlling their bodies. Maybe it controls them by controlling their choices. Give someone enough fear. Give them incomplete information. Give them a loved one in danger. Give them one impossible clue. Then watch what they do. That's much more powerful than simply locking someone behind a wall. Because eventually, the prisoner becomes part of the mechanism. And this brings us back to the children. Why are children so important? Why do they appear in visions? Why are they connected to the deepest mysteries? Why does the story repeatedly return to childhood imagery? Because children represent something the town desperately needs, a story that hasn't been completed yet. Adults arrive with identities. They have histories. They have regrets. They have fixed ideas about themselves. Children are different. They are still becoming who they are. And in a supernatural system built around repeating roles, that makes them incredibly valuable. A child can become a symbol, a sacrifice, a memory, a witness, or perhaps even the beginning of a new cycle. This is why the idea of the Anghkooey children matters so much. Whatever their exact origin turns out to be, their existence suggests that the town's history goes far deeper than the current group of survivors. They are evidence that the nightmare existed before Boyd, before Tabitha, before Jade, before the Matthews family. The current residents didn't create the story. They walked into the middle of it. And perhaps the previous inhabitants did the same. That would explain another strange feature of the show. Why does the town contain so many traces of people who came before? Because maybe the town isn't replacing its victims. It's reusing the structure. One group disappears. Another arrives. The roles return. The mystery continues. And every cycle leaves behind another layer. This could also explain why Victor's presence is so important. Imagine surviving for decades while watching the same kind of tragedy happen again and again. Eventually, you wouldn't remember everything. You'd remember fragments. A sound. A face. A drawing. A location. A feeling. That's exactly how trauma works. But inside From, those fragments may contain something even more important. They may be pieces of the previous cycle. Victor might not consciously understand the complete pattern because the town has effectively broken his memory into pieces. But his drawings preserve what his mind cannot. And if someone can put those pieces together, the entire structure could become visible. That's why Jade is so dangerous to the system. Because Jade doesn't simply experience the mystery. He tries to decode it. He looks for patterns, symbols, connections, historical meaning. He assumes there is a system underneath the chaos. And that instinct may be correct. But it also makes him dangerous. Because if the town survives through confusion, then someone who turns confusion into a pattern becomes a threat. And look at what happens when Jade gets closer to understanding. His visions intensify. His encounters become more disturbing. The past becomes increasingly present, almost as if the town is responding to his investigation. That raises a terrifying possibility. Maybe the supernatural events aren't merely clues. Maybe they are countermeasures. Every time someone gets close to the truth, the system creates another layer of uncertainty, another impossible question, another distraction, another nightmare. And that brings us to the biggest reframe of all. Maybe the town doesn't hide the truth because the truth is impossible to discover. Maybe it hides the truth because someone has discovered it before. And the cycle exists specifically to prevent that discovery from becoming permanent.
Think about that.
What if every generation gets close? What if every generation finds symbols? What if every generation encounters the children? What if every generation tries to escape? And what if every generation eventually fails? Then the people trapped in From aren't simply fighting monsters. They're fighting the accumulated failure of everyone who came before them. The town has already defeated countless attempts. It has already seen people ask the same questions. It already knows how people behave when they become desperate.
It knows what hope looks like.
It knows what grief looks like. It knows what sacrifice looks like. So when a new group arrives, the system doesn't need to improvise. It already knows the playbook. And this is where the theory becomes almost impossible to ignore. The road, the tree, the monsters, the tunnels, the talismans, the symbols, the visions, the children, the bottle trees, the memories. They may not be separate mysteries. They may be different parts of one repeating mechanism. A mechanism designed to keep the story moving without ever allowing the characters to reach the final page. But if that's true, there is one person who may be more important than almost everyone else. Tabitha. Because Tabitha's connection to the children and the larger mystery suggests something very different from simply being another survivor. She may be connected to the role of the rescuer, the person who sees the suffering, the person who believes the children can be saved, the person who refuses to accept the rules. And if that role has existed before, then Tabitha may be repeating something someone else already attempted, which means her journey might not be about discovering something new. It might be about finishing something that was started long ago. And that changes the meaning of escape. Maybe escaping the town isn't the ultimate goal. Maybe the real goal is to break the pattern that creates the town's power. Because if they simply escape, the cycle may continue somewhere else. A different group, a different road, a different set of survivors. The same story, the same roles, the same ending. And that leads to the most frightening possibility yet. What if the town doesn't need to keep everyone trapped forever? What if it only needs to make sure that someone always stays behind? Someone who remembers. Someone who watches. Someone who carries the story into the next cycle. And if that person exists, then the final mystery of From isn't how do they get out? It's much worse. Who is the person the town needs to survive? If the town really is a repeating story, then the characters we've been following may not simply be survivors. They may be roles wearing human faces. And once you look at them that way, their behavior starts making disturbing sense. Boyd is the protector. Jade is the seeker. Tabitha is the rescuer. Victor is the keeper of memory. And the children represent the unfinished past. But there is one role that may be even more important. The person who is supposed to remember enough to restart the story. That could be why memory is such a strange subject in From. People forget. People remember things they shouldn't. People experience visions that feel like memories. and certain objects seem capable of triggering connections between different moments. This isn't just supernatural decoration. It may be the mechanism through which the cycle protects itself, because a perfect memory would allow someone to understand everything, but complete forgetting would make the cycle meaningless.
So the town needs something in between.
It needs people to remember just enough. Enough to investigate. Enough to suffer. Enough to keep searching. But never enough to see the entire pattern. And that may explain Victor better than any simple theory about his past. Victor remembers in fragments because fragments are safer for the system. A complete picture could destroy the illusion. So his mind becomes a broken archive. A box filled with pieces that only make sense when someone else starts connecting them. And perhaps that's exactly why new arrivals matter. They bring fresh eyes. People who don't have decades of trauma clouding their judgment. People like Jade. People like Tabitha. People who can look at an old mystery and ask a new question. But here's the dangerous part. The town may actually need those people. It needs someone to investigate. Because without investigation, there is no progression. And without progression, the cycle becomes static. That's why the town constantly presents clues. It gives just enough information to keep the characters moving. A strange symbol, a vision, a voice, a hidden location, a mysterious object. Every answer creates another question, and every question pulls the characters deeper. That isn't how a normal prison behaves. A normal prison tries to stop escape. From appears to do something more sophisticated. It encourages the search for escape, while controlling where that search leads. And this is where the monsters become even more interesting. Perhaps they aren't the rulers. Perhaps they are maintenance workers. They maintain fear. They punish certain behaviors. They exploit emotional weaknesses. They prevent people from becoming too comfortable. But they may not understand the entire system either. That's important. Because if the monsters were truly the ones controlling everything, why would they behave so strangely? Why would they sometimes seem almost playful? Why would they communicate? Why would they allow certain people to survive? Why would they leave clues behind? Because maybe they aren't the authors. They're actors too. They have a function. They have rules. They have limitations. And that means something else exists above them. Something that designed the larger structure. Something that doesn't need to appear directly, because the system itself does the work. And this brings us back to the children. The children may be the clearest evidence that the current nightmare is only one chapter. Whatever happened to them happened before the current residents arrived. Their suffering became part of the town's mythology. Their images survived. Their presence continued. Their story became embedded into the environment. And if the theory is correct, their tragedy may have created the first version of the cycle. Not necessarily the first supernatural event, but the first story structure. The sacrifice, the loss, the failed rescue, the promise, the attempt to undo what happened. Then another generation arrives, and the same emotional pattern begins again. This would explain why From feels less like a conventional monster story and more like a nightmare that keeps changing its characters. The faces change. The technology changes. The circumstances change. But the emotional structure remains. Someone loses someone. Someone tries to save them. Someone discovers something forbidden. Someone sacrifices themselves. Someone remembers. Someone escapes. Or believes they escaped. And then the cycle begins again. That's not repetition for the sake of repetition. That's design. And now we can finally reframe one of the biggest mysteries in the entire story. Why does escape seem possible at all? Because if escape were obviously impossible, the characters would eventually stop trying. The system needs hope. Hope is the fuel. It makes people take risks. It makes them explore. It makes them believe the next discovery will be different. It makes them continue the story. And that's why the town's most dangerous weapon may not be the monsters. It may be hope itself. Because hope convinces the prisoners to participate.
Think about it.
If the town simply tortured everyone constantly, eventually the characters would break. But instead it gives them victories. Small ones. A person survives. A clue is discovered. A monster is defeated. A new location is found. Someone receives a vision. Someone believes they found a way out. Every victory creates another burst of hope. And every burst of hope leads to another attempt. The town doesn't need to force people to move. It only needs to make them believe that the next step might finally work. That's psychological imprisonment. And this is where the theory reaches its darkest conclusion. The purpose of the cycle may not be to punish people. It may be to produce something, a certain emotional state, a certain kind of person, a certain sacrifice, a certain choice. Perhaps the town needs people to reach the exact moment where they willingly repeat an ancient decision. And if that decision has already happened before, then every new group is unknowingly moving toward the same final moment, which means the real villain may not be the monsters. It may not even be the entity behind the town. The real villain could be the cycle itself, a system that has become self-sustaining, a story that no longer needs an author, a pattern that keeps reproducing because every person inside it unknowingly helps maintain it. Boyd protects. Jade investigates. Tabitha searches for the children. Victor remembers. The monsters hunt. And the town watches. Everyone performs a function. Everyone moves the story forward. But there is one thing the cycle cannot tolerate. Someone refusing to play their role. That's the potential weakness. If Boyd stops being the protector, if Jade stops being the seeker, if Tabitha refuses to become the rescuer, if Victor reveals everything he remembers, then the story may stop behaving the way it is supposed to. And that may be the real path to freedom. Not finding another road. Not killing every monster. Not simply escaping the town, but breaking the role assigned to you. Because a repeating story can survive new characters. It can survive new locations. It can survive new monsters. But it cannot survive if the characters suddenly stop performing the same decisions. And that gives us a terrifying prediction for where the story could go next. Someone may eventually discover that their greatest strength is actually their assigned role. And they will have to deliberately destroy it. Boyd may have to stop saving everyone. Tabitha may have to stop chasing the children. Jade may have to stop trying to decode every mystery. Victor may have to finally confront the memories he has spent decades avoiding. Because the town may be waiting for them to behave exactly as expected. And the moment they don't, the entire system could begin to collapse. But there is one final question. If the town is a repeating story, who remembers the previous ending? Because someone must. Someone has to know what happened before. Someone has to recognize the pattern. Someone has to make sure the same story begins again. And if there is a character who already knows more than they admit, then the biggest mystery isn't what the town is hiding. It's who has been helping it repeat. Maybe the person we think is guiding the survivors is actually guiding the story. Maybe the clues aren't leading them out. Maybe they're leading them exactly where the cycle wants them. And if that is true, then the next time someone sees a familiar symbol, hears a familiar voice, or encounters a familiar figure, they shouldn't ask, "What does this mean?" They should ask something much more frightening. Who has already seen this happen before? Because if someone knows the ending, then the people inside the town may not be trapped inside a mystery. They may be trapped inside a story that already knows how it ends.